It is great to be talking basketball with author Pete Croatto. Pete, the writer of From Hang Time to Prime Time, Business, Entertainment, and the Birth of the Modern Day NBA. And you can get this book any stores. It's available online as well. It is a great read for all you basketball junkies, and it's wonderful to be with the author of that book, Pete Croatto, with us now. And Pete, how did this idea kind of come about for you to put this project and to put this book together?
Yeah, the book has sort of been is a labor of love, and it's actually the end. The book's publication is really the end of a 7-year process. Believe it or not, I started the book kind of came into my mind after I wrote a piece on Marvin Gaye's national anthem at the 1983 NBA All-Star Game in Los Angeles. It's for Grantland, and I had a blast writing it. I interviewed a ton of people, and what came out of that book and the reporting was that really that anthem, which really was sort of a complete overhaul of Francis Scott Key's song. It was as I write in the book, it really turned the national anthem into baby making music. To me, it kind of served as the line between the old NBA and the new NBA, the NBA that we know today, an NBA that cherished, or rather takes takes a long look at entertainment, that looks at not just sticking to tradition and trying to placate, quote unquote old school fans. So I really became interested in how that transition happened. I wanted to know what happened before that anthem and what happened after that anthem. So the book really came to be because of that moment. So 8 years later now, here we are because of that article that I wrote for Grantland, which really kind of made me look at the NBA in a different way.
Let's look at those moments. And you talked about it in the book, the ABA NBA merger in 1976.
Yeah.
Inside those meetings, when you're going through different archives and different things to put this story, to put this book together, what do you view as that turning point, as that why we saw things shift to the degree in which they shifted, and how much do you just zone in on a particular moment as to this is the reason why we started to emerge into the NBA as we know it now, which, as you bring up, 4 decades ago, you used the word, it was unthinkable to think it would be here. I guess the idea is, how did the unthinkable become thinkable?
That's a good question. And really what it is, really how I reached the point of, okay, well, these are like the 5 or 6 turning points. It comes across through a few reasons. First of all, it's just, I alluded to this earlier, just reporting and researching. But a lot of that is also just being, I think I'm a fairly astute follower of the history of the game, and just, I'm someone who spent the formative years of their childhood, reading Xander Hollander handbooks, and reading book after book after book, and just sort of realize, like, like I know the NBA was in trouble. And I know the NBA had its growing pains, but I didn't really know, like, how it got through those growing pains. I mean, I knew the shorthand like a lot of basketball fans. There's Magic and there's Larry and there's that rivalry from the '79 NCAA championship game, and Michael Jordan comes along and David Stern comes along. But I wanted to know more about the how and the why. So the long answer to your question is, I think it's a combination of knowing the game beyond just what's presented in front of me now. And it's also just interviewing a ton of people, interviewing 315 people, and also going through old newspaper clippings and magazine articles, and also, by stroke of good luck, looking at Larry O'Brien's oral history of his time at the NBA, which his son Larry was gracious enough to share with me. It's going through all those things, and then sort of sifting through to find the nuggets, and then taking those those big moments and trying to dig in deeper. So it's really 5 or 6 moments, I think, or maybe even between 6 and a dozen moments where the NBA kind of reaches a maturation. And it's kind of funny. We all sort of think, well, it's Magic and Larry and Michael and David Stern, but it really goes beyond that. And I think the book shows that. The book shows that it's more than just the 4 or 5 individuals that made this transition happen.
It goes without saying that David Stern is at the center of this. He had the next level thought process that has led basketball to where it is today. Commissioner Stern just stands in a class of his own, in my mind, and I'm sure in yours. What made him such a great leader?
There are 2 things. I think the first is that he had a love for basketball, a love for the NBA. He grew up with the game. He grew up a diehard Knicks fan, and he just had a love of basketball that I think would rival pretty much any fan now. I mean, he was somebody who just, he had a childhood love of basketball, and it kept blossoming. So there was that, but he also saw what the NBA could be. He saw that the NBA had these great players who were eloquent, who were good with the media, who had something to say, and he also saw that these players just had unquestionable skill. They were empirically, athletically gifted players, and he knew that the best way to show those features would be to promote the best qualities of the game, and that was through television, that was through advertising that could introduce the casual fans, or even the people who were borderline fans, to follow the game and enjoy the game beyond what they thought they knew. And a great example of that is the NBA It's Fantastic ads in the 1980s. Where these would air during games, and they would get people into the games. They would get people into the fun of attending a basketball game. Forget about your worries, forget about your problems. You don't even need to know like the history. Just enjoy the action that's on the court. And David Stern, was really, he had this love of basketball, but he was a marketing genius, and he understood that, as he told Don Sperling, who was the head of NBA Entertainment. David Stern used to always say that it's not what the fans think about the players, how they feel about the players. So if you get them excited, and if you get them, psyched up for them to see Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson, and you present these players in the best possible light, the fans are gonna feel really excited, and they're gonna want to see a game and get out there and see what all the fuss is about.
We see the NBA's role today in culture and everything that it has meant to the efforts against the social, the racial inequalities in society. The NBA has long been something, a league, an association, a movement, really, that goes beyond basketball. That is a cultural movement. You talk a lot about that in your book. How much do you just continually get fascinated, interested by that idea of the NBA, the role that it had in Black culture, and in a time where there were still some people, unfortunately, questioning that idea and the growth of it, just how much the NBA used it and said, we are here to grow. We are here to grow society, and we are here to grow Black culture, the fan engagement, everything about it, and just everything that the league stood for that aligns with Black culture.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable story, and again, that starts with David Stern's ability as a marketer, and him understanding that, and in fact, I mentioned this book, and in fact, one of the great pleasures was talking to Harry Edwards, the famed sociologist and activist, who said, the one thing that David Stern did was you never heard the players talk about racial issues. You never heard the players talk about, what it was like growing up in certain circumstances. The whole rivalry with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird's a perfect example of that. I mean, the NBA did a marvelous job of just focusing on these players in the broadest strokes possible, so that when you heard Magic Johnson's storyline, you really didn't think about color. I mean, as cliched and as simplistic as that sounds, it was always presented as, well, here's this here's this hardworking kid who grew up in Lansing. You know, he grew up in a working class family. He would shovel the snow off the basketball court and shoot jump shots. The NBA turned all of these players, black and white, into these very easily identifiable parables that everyone can get behind. I mean, everyone loves a good comeback story. So you heard about Michael Jordan getting cut from his high school basketball team. You heard about you know, as I said before, about Magic Johnson, you know, getting up in those cold Michigan mornings and shooting hoops. So the NBA really, by breaking down or dismissing the racial elements, they kind of also they also created these mainstream black superstars who were palatable to a wide audience. That helps, and it also helped that you had, you know, this game coverage that focused them as entertainers. You had videos that focused on their stories and on these dazzling plays and what they could do on the court, and that really kind of set the stage for what you see now. Because and not only that, but there's this. In the interviews that I did, the NBA, the one thing that comes across about the NBA is that it is a league whose tradition is that there is no tradition. So the NBA can go out and support Black Lives Matter. They can do all of these things and not lose, I think, a core amount of fans, because this is something that they've always been at the cutting edge with whatever's going on. So really, supporting Black Lives Matter, as part of me, not only becomes a way to kind of express its community for its fans and for the players that are on the court, but it's also a way that it also is in line with their line of think with the NBA's line of thinking, which is that they're always ahead of the curve. So while baseball and the NFL has its fans get up in arms over, well, this is too political or this is that, for the NBA, this is always how they've done business. They've always been about being ahead of the curve, and whether it's, you know, promoting, you know, the black athlete like Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan, or which even though it sounds radical to even think that it's radical to say that something that you're going to support, you know, Black Lives Matter. In this case, it's certainly true. You know, the NBA comes across as forward thinking in this matter because that's what they've always done. And it goes back to Marvin Gaye and embracing Black culture, even in a very superficial form.
Who are the most interesting interviews as you're writing this book? You know,
it's funny. People ask me that, and I think they always want to hear, like, oh, it's Julius Erving or George Gervin or even someone like Rick Welch. But the one thing I found, that I've always found to be the case in interview, whether I'm writing stories or this book, is that the people that you've never heard a word about are always the most interesting people. So someone like Barbara Ward, who was an administrative assistant during the NBA in the early 1980s, was an absolutely fascinating interview subject because she just recounted all of these details from her 2 years working at the office. Mark Tomashow, who was an NBA executive, a Nike executive in the 1980s and 1990s, had just treasure troves of stories to tell. You know, those two stand out, and I think it kind of goes to show that the NBA's success came from the people that you may not have heard of. You know, all these people sort of working in concert with each other to create, you know, an international force. So I would say Mark and Barbara are up there in terms of just being people that were just fascinating to talk to. If you're looking for a high profile person, you know, I think George Gervin was just endlessly entertaining. I could have spoken to Ice for 3 hours. He was great.
What's something that when you started writing the book, you thought it was one thing and it turned out to surprise you when you were doing interviews, or maybe after the fact, something that just stands out to you about the book that in the moment you thought one thing and it led to another?
There are a couple of things. I mean, since you're a Big East guy, I think it's what's surprising to me was just how little this CBS valued the NBA.
Yeah.
I read about this extensively in the last part of the book. CBS, the NBA was very happy with CBS as a television partner. They loved the coverage, they loved the announcers, they loved everything about it. And CBS had to make a choice between the NCAA tournament and NCAA basketball and the NBA. And the NBA and the NCAA, and I'm sorry, CBS chose the NCAA. There was more money involved. There was more. There was a greater. There were greater sponsorship opportunities, greater commercial opportunities, and and CBS, instead of going with the NBA, signed a disastrous deal with Major League Baseball. That was just, I think it was $1 billion for maybe 12 games over 4 seasons, and it was an absolute train wreck. And the NBA and David Stern always reminded Neil Pilson, the president of CBS Sports at the time, about the mistake that he made, because the NBA went on to become bigger and better, and baseball just really fizzled for CBS. And they could have had, if they played their cards right, they could have had both the NBA and the NCAA basketball. But the problem with that was David Stern wanted the whole pie. He was upset that David Stern hated the fact that CBS abandoned NBA coverage in March and April for the NCAA tournament. And that was something that Pilson and David Stern just couldn't see eye to eye on. And ultimately, CBS kind of put in a lowball offer. NBC, which had pretty much no major sports at the time, went all in, and NBC and the NBA had this remarkable television relationship that expanded. That lasted, for about 12 years, and it made them both sides a lot of money. So that's one thing that stood out. And the other thing too was how close the NBA came to not having a television contract. I mean, they were this close to not having a television contract in 1978. Frank Smith, who was the new president of CBS Sports, stepped in and saw that the NBA had a contract and was like, nope, I didn't agree to this, don't want it, I'm getting rid of it. And it took David Stern begging Neil Pilson, who then who at the time was Frank Smith's second in command, to save the NBA. I mean, David Stern literally had to beg Neil Pilson to save the NBA from being non-existent on network television, which is crazy to me.
It is crazy. You know what else? You know what stands out about this more than anything, Pete,
Mm-hmm.
is that the title of the book sums it up. Like, from Hang Time,
Mm-hmm.
there were instances
Mm-hmm.
in the NBA's life in which there was an uncertainty day to day, hour to hour, on the pulse of the league in certain areas. And I find it fascinating because you don't have a tradition to go off of.
Mm-hmm.
You're at a time where other sports have the stage. They've got the stage taken. They are the A sport. And we know football in America is king. I mean, that's just how it is.
Yes.
But the way in which the NBA found its niche during a time in which it could have easily, correct me if I'm wrong, fallen flat on their face.
Oh yeah, they could have, and that's why, and this is why David Stern gets my vote as the best sports commissioner of all time, because he saw the value in marketing personalities. And so again, if you think of football and the NFL especially, and Major League Baseball, it's all about the team. It's all about, you root for the Red Sox, you root for the New York Giants, you root for the 49ers. David Stern said, you know what, we're not going to do that. We are going to focus on individuals. And I think that's what got kids involved. Because if you're marketing because kids, I really believe this as a former kid myself, they gravitate toward heroes. They gravitate toward individuals. And if you're an outsider, like I was when I got into the game, it's much easier to latch yourself onto Michael Jordan or Patrick Ewing or any number of players than to latch yourself onto a team. So it was a genius stroke. It was a master stroke for David Stern to say, you know what, we're going to cater to personalities. And that's how you get the unfamiliar involved. and especially when you have players that are as transcendent as Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and even Dr. J, that's your hook. And it's the same way. It's the same that it sticks to this day. If you look at the NBA now, how many players do you know who you can identify on a first name basis? I mean, it's Giannis, Steph, it goes on and on, LeBron, and I think that's what saved the NBA, is that their refusal to stick to tradition, to partner with the clothing companies, the sneaker companies, to make apparel that would be geared toward kids, to latch on to hip hop and the rap community and go to where the kids are. I mean, that to me is a foolproof plan, because you get the kids, they become fans that inspire the next generation, and you can use that blueprint to inspire kids on and on and on. And the NBA is still doing that today.
Yeah, it's amazing that it just goes back to, I just love that idea of the NBA's tradition is that it hasn't had a tradition.
Exactly.
It just continues to evolve, and therein lies the parallels with our pop culture world.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the NBA is so popular on Twitter and Instagram and all these social media platforms, because again, it is all about the NBA is always thinking three moves ahead. They're always looking to reinvent. And again, what moves quicker and what reinvents itself more than Instagram and Twitter and every other social media platform, including ones that I'm probably not even naming because they're popping up like that. It's the NBA, I think, is really the sport that is going to be around for, I don't worry about the NBA's future. No. I mean, as a baseball fan, I worry about baseball. The NFL can't seem to get out of its own way in terms of recognizing human rights, and that black people that black people, when they're on a football field, are much different, are going to be recognized and treated much differently off the football field. That seems to be that seems to mystify the NFL. The NBA has mastered, and I hate to use this word, I'm going to use it, they have mastered optics better than any professional sport that I can think of. And they have fully realized how to market the players on and off the court, and also recognize that their players are people off the court. They've learned how to master those optics. It's fascinating to me.
Well, to me, at the end of the day, the best optics are going to come in actions. And what
Yes,
I love about the NBA is the actions that they've taken. There have been material actions that they have taken that have empowered their players, which is absolutely should be the case in 2021, of course. But you know what? That started by giving athletes empowerment way back in the 1970s and 80s that they had not previously had in professional sports. So
exactly. It goes down to look. The thing that I want to do with this book was I wanted people who are NBA fans now to read this book and realize that the NBA that they're watching now, that didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't as if a switch was flipped and all of a sudden, oh yeah, there's this international game where the players are running are the stars, and they're known the world over. This took decades to happen. And you're right. This whole notion of empowerment, this whole notion of the ability that someone like LeBron James, he comes this socially aware athlete, that is someone who was born out of folks like Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, folks that the folks that came along before him to set wheels in motion, that also took place with the NBA's salary cap motion, all those things. They're all tied together. So the NBA's, it's funny, we talk about the NBA has no tradition. There is a tradition, but you have to go back. And I think this book does a really good job of showing where that tradition came from. And, and I'm hoping that, 20, 30 years from now, someone else will write about what's happening now, and you know, and how that tradition is improving.
Pete Croatto, this is a wonderful conversation. This book, your first, it was published in 2020 by Simon & Schuster, and it's been available nationally since late last year. So you can get it any resellers, any bookstores. It's out there. It's online, folks. Over 300 interviews with some huge names in the NBA. But like you said, Pete, you covered all grounds. You got behind the scenes people. You got people who we've never even heard from in this book, and all about the NBA's rise and everything that's come with it, from hang time to prime time. I love this story. I love everything about it. And Pete Croatto, a huge credit to you, because I know that this is a labor of love. And as a fellow lover of basketball, I love that you've put this project together. And the reviews speak for themselves. They've all been positive for good reason. Pete, congratulations on this project, and thanks for talking some basketball with us.
Oh, thank you, John. It's my pleasure to have been on here. Yeah. Oh, I think you're frozen. Oh,
should be on now. You got me now?
Still frozen on your end.
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay, I'll just keep talking.
Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure. Oh, there we go. Yeah, John, my pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much for having me. Couple things about the book. If you want an autographed copy, personalized, you can get one. You can get them through Odyssey Books in Ithaca. Just go to odysseybookstore.com. And if you buy the book and send me proof, I'm happy to mail you a signed book plate. And that's really about it in terms of my promotional spiel. But it was great to be on here. Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
And Pete, we can follow you on Twitter as well. I see that's just at Pete, Croatto, as well on social media. Pete, congratulations, and thanks to all of you for watching. And if you haven't checked it out yet, check out From Hang Time to Prime Time. If you're a basketball lover, even if you just like sports, this is the book for you, talking about an amazing story of how the NBA became what it now is today, beyond basketball, but culturally, in society, in pop culture, and more. Pete, thank you.
My pleasure, John. Thank you.